Hello, and welcome to Film Finds. On this week's episode, I will be taking a look at Alphaville. Jean-Luc Godard is perhaps the most enigmatic of the essential film directors. His works pushed the French New Wave to the forefront of cinema in the 1960s, yet he never settled with one particular style. His works after 1967 are essentially targeted towards the most extreme cinephiles, but even his relatively mainstream films from the 1960s consistently question the limits of cinema. Of this era, Alphaville stands as one of the most strikingly bizarre. Where his earlier films are better known for their boundary-pushing takes on editing and other techniques, Alphaville is largely a question of stylistic choices. It is his one genre film, a combination of film noir and science fiction, but this is only half true within the presentation of the film itself. While set on a far-off planet, Godard takes absolutely no steps to hide the fact that the film was shot in Paris. Film as an art form has always carried the issue of accessibility. Where books require words and the fine arts only material, film has always required more. But here, Godard questions that idea. Why does film have to fill in the gaps that people can imagine while reading books? Why isn't it enough for a character to simply declare he's traveling to another planet when he's clearly climbing into a car? Which, admittedly, sounds a bit pretentious. To an outsider, the works of Godard read like all the worst things you have heard about foreign art films. But there's a certain amount of self-awareness that lets his works pass as something else entirely. Though nearly all of his works are presented with a straight face, I tend to view them as knowing satires. Godard is blatantly aware of how silly moments of this film come across. The fact it's played entirely straight is simply part of the comedy. For example, without any real context, the film has an early scene of secret agent Lemmy Caution walking through a hotel lobby with a deeply aggressive score, but nothing happens. Godard creates moods that don't quite fit, a form of disorientation. As such, we are made blatantly aware of the psychological manipulation inherent in film. Likewise, there's a striking casualness to an early scene where Lemmy is assaulted. He almost nonchalantly combats his attacker, with the type of assuredness reserved only for an actor who is aware he's in no danger. There is no strive for believability. As such, many images serve a purely representational purpose. The limit is the audience's desire to use their imagination. Godard is also one of the clearest examples of postmodernism in film. Most emblematic in this particular film is the concept of mixing high and low art. Characters at times speak in philosophical diatribes, a contrast to its lowbrow narrative influences. Godard gives no sense of dignity to either form. Many of these long conversations seem ultimately pointless, and any point of true genre tension is immediately cut down by a lack of conviction. In a way, Godard seems like a precursor to a troll. He knows the exact buttons to press to get certain people to give up in frustration. But if you can stoop down to his almost vulgar approach to cinema, you'll find a certain playfulness. More than with any other director, when I watch a Godard film, I imagine that he is simply doing it all for his love of cinema. Yet, through all of this comedic distance, Alphaville manages to craft moments of both horror and true depth. The villain's musings on emotion and reality strike a powerful chord, Godard's choice of words having a magnificent lyricism. After all, how many of us ever truly understand those concepts? Part of the effect of this film is that, as you continue watching, its method eventually sinks in. At least in my case, it stopped mattering that this film was clearly shot in Paris. In the end, what matters to Godard is that he can capture an emotion, no matter what normal cinematic conventions suggest. As we draw closer to the finale, a certain sense of dread creeps in, as Godard seems to draw more and more inspiration from Orwell. Managing such an emotional feat in a work that largely rejects standard narrative presentation is truly awe-inspiring. The images within this film also draw attention to this conflict between logic and emotion. Neon signs reading famous formulas will pop on screen, but they read as warnings. To be too formulaic, too attached to your perceptions of reality, is to limit free thought. The greatest appeal of a Godard film is the fact that his works read like criticisms of themselves. They are not to be engaged with as simple experiences, but rather a source of active thought. He never wants to lull the viewer into acceptance. You should be asking questions at every odd turn, and when you don't, it's a sign he has successfully played you. The rules of film aren't written in stone. Godard finds language in the deconstruction of those rules. As such, his films are rarely for light viewing, but when you truly want to engage with how films work, his style is absolutely essential. Now, I want to cycle back to the central premise of this film. Why make a science fiction film without any visual semblance to the genre? As I've said, I believe Godard only presents an air of pretentiousness as a knowing joke. His purpose here is to show that anyone can do it. If a director is talented enough, they can create a convincing work in any genre. Alphaville might not look like a sci-fi film, but it has certainly held up better than most from its era. Again, a lack of budget can be countered with the right amount of creativity. By rejecting these notions about cinema, Godard argued that genre films could belong to the people. And that is the enigma of Jean-Luc Godard. He is simultaneously arguing for the freedom of the common man while speaking in a language designed for only a certain few. But the language of cinema can be learned by anyone.